Hi, and welcome once again to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today we have a very, very important piece to share with you. Our title is Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
So when we did a sister story over at our other magazine, Enjoy English, I told my students I felt honored to actually talk about this. This is one of the great American heroes that I think very few people could argue was not an important contributor to the overall betterment of our country. And of course, everybody has their own flaws, and we'll talk about that. But this is one of the very few true figures that do not divide people very, very readily. Everyone kind of wants to get on this guy's side.
Right. It kind of brings tears to my eyes every time I read something about this. And I find that I react like this whenever there's some talk about unifying people. Like for Gandhi and for other people, somebody who is able to unify people in the same purpose for good. That brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah, I agree. I get a little emotional talking about our subject today, Martin Luther King Jr., who is a person that strictly wanted to help other people become more equal in the American society. As everyone probably knows, there's big problems with your race and color in the United States.
Yeah.
And this is a man that wanted to just make everybody equal. Not asking for more, not asking to take away, just that everybody has the same, which is a very fair idea.
And to achieve it without violence.
That's right.
That's the key, because when we have conflict, there's a real temptation to jump in and use violence to try to get rid of the opposition or solve it. But we know from history that any time you use violence to try to solve something, you end up with more violence in the future. And that has happened, for example, with the Civil War. We still are feeling the consequences of the Civil War in the U.S.
Yeah, just as Karen says here. So, in fact, Martin Luther King's struggle for equality in the United States was one of the consequences of the unresolved issues of the American Civil War. After the Civil War, slavery was abolished, but people were not equal in society. In fact, there was something famously known as separate but equal, that yes, you can separate races, keep them apart, as long as everything was equal. But of course, it wasn't equal for African Americans and Black Americans, and Martin Luther King wanted to change that. Separate but equal is not fair. In fact, we should all be together, and equality is very easy to see. But I suppose when you're a person in a higher position, equality feels like something's being taken away from you.
Because you're so used to getting so much extra.
That's right.
Right. And this is one aspect of America that if you want to understand American culture, you absolutely have to look at this. And I've been surprised at how interested my students are in the whole topic.
It's an incredibly fascinating topic because this is a person not from long ago. This is a person that only died, about 40 years ago, that transformed society by just asking to be equal and to do it in a way that there was no fighting, there was no guns, there was no violence on his part, but the society looking to stop him was more than willing to use violence to try to get in his way.
That's right. Well, we'll learn more about Martin Luther King Jr. in today's article. Here's paragraph 1. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, MLK Day, is a holiday celebrating the life and achievements of Martin Luther King Jr. It is one of only 3 federal holidays in the United States tied to a specific person, along with George Washington's birthday, which is celebrated as President's Day in February, and Christopher Columbus Day in October. The holiday takes place annually around King's birthday, January 15th. It is set for the third Monday of January, usually sometime between January 15th and 21st, because of the U.S. government's Uniform Monday Holiday Act.
King was a key figure in the American Civil Rights Movement. Born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, King became a Baptist minister in Montgomery, Alabama in 1954. A year later, he rose to political prominence when he led a Montgomery bus boycott following the arrest of African-American Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat to a white passenger in the front of a bus. In 1963, he led the March on Washington, where he delivered his enormously influential I Have a Dream speech. In it, he said, he dreamed of an America in which blacks could truly be free and racism would cease to exist. His words and nonviolent actions directly contributed to the passing of the Civil Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination, and the Voting Rights Act, which gave African Americans full voting rights.
Shortly after King was assassinated on April 4, 1968, members of the public called for a holiday in his honor. Some cities and states began holding annual events on King's birthday, but the holiday only went national after Congress passed legislation in 1983. Observance of the holiday officially began in 1986. Since then, cities across the country have celebrated MLK Day every year by holding marches, speeches, and volunteer events as a tribute to his legacy. Back to the beginning. Again, our title is very straightforward, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Our first sentence, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, MLK Day, is a holiday celebrating the life and achievements of Martin Luther King Jr.
So the word holiday actually just comes from the word holy, H-O-L-Y, holy thinking about God and heaven and spirits, and holy day is transformed into holiday with that nice short O sound.
And especially in British English, they'll often say, I'm going on holiday. In American English, we usually say, I'm going on a vacation.
You know what I often have to fight in my classroom? When we're going into the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, they'll say, oh, it's the holiday.
It's not a holiday.
No, it's not a vacation. It's not a holiday. It's just the weekend. A holiday is an extra special day. Holiday's root is holy. It, generally speaking, is a religious day. But we often do talk about holidays of non-religious consequence. We might talk about, in America, July 4th or Independence Day, Labor Day. Those are holidays.
Right. Our next sentence, it is one of only 3 federal holidays in the United States tied to a specific person, along with George Washington's birthday, which is celebrated as President's Day in February, and Christopher Columbus Day in October. Now, there is a lot of negative feeling now about Christopher Columbus.
You know, there's so much we can say about this. And actually, I'm going to tie this in a little bit later about something I'm going to say later. Christopher Columbus was a bad dude. He did some really bad stuff.
Cruel.
He was incredibly cruel. In fact, he wrote in his diary shortly after arriving in the United States. Well, excuse me, the land that would become the United States. He says, I could make everybody on this continent a slave with just a few soldiers. That was his plan. But why do we celebrate this guy? Well, in fact, in the 1930s, when this became a holiday, there were many Italian immigrants, and they faced discrimination. They faced racism, and people treated them poorly. They were lynched, which means to just run in and hang someone and kill them without evidence. And so they wanted to honor Italian-American heritage, and so they created Christopher Columbus Day. There's a little bit of a kind of I suppose it's certain irony that we have Christopher Columbus Day, and we consider this guy a really bad guy, but the holiday was created to honor Italian-Americans who were facing a lot of discrimination, just like we honor Martin Luther King as a way of celebrating him for the good things that he did too for his people.
To raise the status of Black people
That's
and
right.
make us more aware of the issues. It was not just Black people who have suffered under racism or ethnic differences. Of course, they probably got it the worst, along with Native Americans. However, just about any immigrant group that came to the U.S. also suffered discrimination.
Absolutely
the Italians, the Irish.
The Polish, yeah. I mean, Polish jokes are a thing.
Germans. Germans are probably the most dominant group. Like 40% of white Americans probably have German background. And Swedes, they were often treated badly when they were immigrants. So every immigrant group has probably gone through this. It's just been especially bad for Black Americans, for Africans, and for Native Americans.
I completely agreed with you. Karen is spot on here that basically any immigrant group faced a lot of discrimination. And I mean, it's all over our language if you really dig into it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And African Americans and the ancestors of African slaves definitely had it worse, especially in the American South.
Which means that it comes down to we discriminate against people who are different from us.
Exactly.
Anybody who's different, you're going to have problems. We feel it here, even though we as foreigners often get better treatment, but it's still different.
It's still different.
Okay, so back to our article. The holiday takes place annually around King's birthday, January 15th. Now, why is it around King's birthday and not on King's birthday? It explains in the next sentence. It is set for the third Monday of January, usually sometime between January 15th and 21st, because of the U.S. government's Uniform Monday Holiday Act.
It just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Well, if you read it slowly enough, it does. It was okay. At least I didn't stumble. The thing is that we would like to take advantage of the weekend and make it a longer weekend. So we put it on a Monday so it doesn't come in the middle of the week and break things up. And you can't really do anything with just one day off. So it's a nice idea. And in Taiwan, we do the same thing.
I don't mind the occasional Tuesday day off. We get like this random Tuesday off, and if you're smart and you plan ahead, you schedule you take a vacation day for Monday, and now you have a 4-day weekend. I have to say the Uniform Monday Holiday Act, little overrated as far as I'm concerned.
I see. Okay, well, it does have its advantages.
Let's go to our second paragraph. King was a key figure in the American civil rights movement.
All right, this is underlined here. It's because it's a huge, huge thing. And this was really active when I was just growing up in the 60s. And I think at the time, I realized that there was political foment and turbulence going on. I was also thinking, why in the world do we have to stand up for this? It should be obvious, isn't it? Because I grew up with Black classmates and things. I mean, why in the world would they get different treatment? Why would they not have vote? I mean, all of it was just unthinkable. Why is this necessary? But that's because a lot of white people were not aware of how necessary it was and what bad treatment people were getting. We could say especially in the South, but the North is, I would say, just as guilty. We didn't have slavery in the North. We were less used to having Black people around. And often Black people and white people were still very separate. And you will recall that the George Floyd incident happened in my home state of Minnesota, which is viewed as a liberal state, and we're very proud for being progressive and all this. But Black and white are often very separate.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, the city I grew up in, Buffalo, remains one of the most segregated cities in the United States. I will tell you, I grew up in a Black neighborhood, and I went to a school that was overwhelmingly Black. I mean, I might be one of two kids that were white in my whole class, and there might be 6 or 7 white students in all of our 5th grade or 6th grade or whatever it is.
Did you ever feel uncomfortable because of that, or
No,
you were just used to it?
No, I was bullied because I was small and like kind of a nerdy kid, but I never felt it was because I was white. I did get called white boy a lot, but never once did I feel it was like a racist thing. They just called me white boy.
Well, you are. It's the truth.
I was the white boy. That's right. Yeah. So, yeah, I personally grew up in a very Black neighborhood. And just like Karen said, like your schools are segregated and they often don't mix. Very rare do you have almost a 50-50 mix.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So you should become acquainted with the American Civil Rights Movement, which really became strong in the 1960s. Okay?
Let's continue to our next sentence. Born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, King became a Baptist minister in Montgomery, Alabama in 1954.
Oh, there's something important here that is also very cultural, and that is that a lot of African Americans were Baptists, and they have a very unique, special style of giving sermons. It's a very emotional style, and they will call out things that they're saying, and they expect a response from the audience.
Yeah, very musical.
They're like, Amen and Hallelujah, and that is very much the style of the Black Baptist Church. And one thing that amazed me when I went to South Africa, I grew up Lutheran, and Lutherans in Minnesota are very, very quiet and usually quite polite, not emotional at church. We stand up, we sit down, we pray, and it's all kind of passive. I visited a Lutheran church in South Africa. People joined hands, were singing in 4-part harmony, the whole congregation, not just the choir. They were so warm and involved, and I thought, if I had that in Minnesota, I would have loved going to church every week.
This is so true. So my church was Roman Catholic. It was very quiet. It was very boring. And I would sometimes go to church with my Black friends, and it was way more fun.
It was
a lot more fun. But the downside is it's like 3 hours. When they go to church, you're going to church all day. You dress up, and you're there a long time.
But you're so emotionally involved and connected to other people. It's a warm emotional experience.
Yeah. I visited Dr. King's church in Atlanta, and it was lovely. It was amazing to be there. It's quite an old building now, and they have a lot of its history. But walking in there, you're like, holy smokes, this is where Dr. King used to preach. It just permeates the walls of the history that's in this place.
Yeah, inspires awe.
Let's continue. A year later, he rose to political prominence when he led a Montgomery bus boycott following the arrest of African-American Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat to a white passenger in the front of a bus.
And that is probably the most famous incident of this whole period and of the civil rights movement. And Rosa Parks is highly honored for this reason.
You should know this name. If you are expected to understand American culture, Rosa Parks is a cultural touchstone. She was a 43-year-old woman, and she just said, I will not get out of this seat. She was required by law. She could sit anywhere she wanted on the bus, but she was required by law. If a white person said, hey, I want to sit here, she was required to get up and go sit in the back of the bus, or to stand if there were no other seats. Now, what's important to know about here, that the back of the bus is where the engines used to be on old buses. It was hotter,
smellier.
It was smokier, it was smellier, and it was noisier. It was the worst place to sit possible. She refused to do this, and she got arrested for this. She got arrested because she refused to get out of her seat because a white man demanded it. Imagine if I walked up to you as a white man in Taipei in the MRT and said, hey, get out of my seat.
I'm white. It's
Could
mine.
you imagine this? Could you imagine how unbelievably unfair that is? Imagine the rage she felt.
And imagine how brave she was to do that.
That's right. Absolutely. Instead of my rage, her bravery. I agree. I agree with you, Karen. Let's continue here. Our next sentence begins in 1963. He led the March on Washington, where he delivered his enormously influential I Have a Dream speech.
Now, in regard to what we just said about this very emotional back and forth that you find in Black churches, when I first heard this speech, I thought, my gosh, he's so emotional because I wasn't used to the style because I grew up in that quiet white church.
You know, it's so funny that you mentioned about the Baptist church just a few minutes ago, because in this speech, I Have a Dream was in fact crossed out. They said, no, it's a little too corny. It's a little too Baptist. They crossed it out because they wanted to reach a wider audience. But as Dr. King gave his speech, he was the 10th speaker and the final speaker of this day. And in the crowd was a gospel singer, and she yelled out, tell him about the dream, Martin. And he changed his speech back to what he originally wrote. And he went into his Baptist minister speech. That's right. And that's where the line, I have a dream, comes from.
I never knew that, because what is the one line that everybody remembers?
That's it, his powerful voice.
I have a dream. And it was so powerful. And sometimes it takes something that's a little corny to really last. And I don't think it's corny at all anyway.
Let's continue to our next line. In it, he said, he dreamed of an America in which blacks could truly be free and racism would cease to exist.
And that sums up the whole purpose of this whole thing. So where blacks felt that they were actually free from slavery, they were not stuck back in the past where they were second-class or third-class citizens, and that people would no longer treat people of different colors differently.
That's right. He asked for white children and black children to sit together at a table of brotherhood, that we can sit together and just enjoy a meal, which in his lifetime, white people and black people could not even sit together at a restaurant. They needed to go to different places or even be outside of the entire building. Unbelievable.
I want to mention something that has struck me recently. Now, I recently got in touch with the black classmates that I grew up with since kindergarten over Facebook. It's been really fun because they were the people who were just classmates. I wasn't even thinking in terms of race back then. And I noticed that there was something special about them. You think that it's just an issue of white people not being comfortable around blacks. Many black people are not comfortable around whites either because they'd rather be with people who understand them better. But these two classmates are equally comfortable with anybody. And that really impressed me.
I think part of that is familiarity. The more different kinds of people you experience and are around, the more willing you are to open yourself up to other ideas, the easier this all is. I mean, tell you the truth, I'm very comfortable watching black comedy, being around black folks, being with black people because of the way I grew up. I'm definitely the white boy, as I was called as a kid, but I've never felt out of place personally. And people maybe not knowing my background think I'm a little unusual. But once they kind of understand where I came from, who I grew up with, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I know this.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Let's continue here. His words and nonviolent actions directly contributed to the passing of the Civil Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination, and the Voting Rights Act, which gave African Americans full voting rights.
Now, that was during President Johnson's presidency, and that's because Kennedy had recently been killed, and one reason was because he supported civil rights, and he didn't get a chance to finish what he started, so that was left to President Johnson to carry out. Okay, our last paragraph. Shortly after King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, members of the public called for a holiday in his honor. And having been assassinated, that made him into a kind of martyr, which eventually made him into a kind of saint, which he was not.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, Dr. King had a very controversial past. As we mentioned at the very top of the show with Christopher Columbus Day, Christopher Columbus did a lot of bad things, and people attack him, rightfully so, for those bad things. Some people today will tell you that Martin Luther King is not worthy of a holiday because he was a womanizer. I mean, he could be crude. He smoked. Yeah, they would find reasons to say, well, no. We shouldn't remember all the good things he did because sometimes he did bad things. This is nonsense.
One thing you need to keep in mind is that all of us have yin and yang, and we can try to hide that yin, but it's there. No matter who you are, no matter how much good you do, there's going to be a big dark side to everything.
We do not let perfection be the enemy of good.
Exactly. Our next sentence, some cities and states began holding annual events on King's birthday, but the holiday only went national after Congress passed legislation in 1983. So people already started celebrating his birthday every year, but it didn't become a national holiday until 1983. Observance of the holiday officially began in 1986.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a black neighborhood. I went to a black school, and I was in kindergarten when this became a holiday. And let me tell you, I recall all of the posters, all of the pictures, all of the books, all of the things we did for Dr. King. It was humongous. One of the things that got the Dr. King holiday over the hump, so to speak, to actually become a holiday, was this song called Happy Birthday, written by the incredible Stevie Wonder. And in it, it sounds like just a happy birthday song to a friend, but he says that he can't believe that a man that works so hard for love could not have a day set aside in his memory. And my school, anytime a kid had a birthday, a teacher had a birthday, they played the Stevie Wonder Happy Birthday song. And I didn't know this was not a common thing outside of black communities until I was an adult. Yeah. I thought, of course everybody plays the Stevie Wonder Happy Birthday song. And a lot of white folks just don't know it.
I didn't know it. So I hope that you pay close attention to today's program because you'll learn a lot of really very, very important cultural information. Our last sentence, since then, cities across the country have celebrated MLK Day every year by holding marches, speeches, and volunteer events as a tribute to his legacy.
A true American hero, if there ever was one, know the names, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks.
We have two quick questions for you. Number one, on what basis was the date of MLK Day chosen? And the answer is?
The answer is the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay, and our second question, how long after King's assassination did it take before the first National MLK Day was held?
About 18 very long years.
That is it for today, but do a little research online and find out more about this important topic. That will be it for today. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.